Beryl had spent her entire career weaving dreams into reality, orchestrating perfect weddings with a meticulous hand and a heart full of dedication. Yet, she never thought she would find herself at the center of a wedding that threatened to unravel her entire life. She stood in the grand banquet hall of Shanghai's most luxurious hotel, staring at the towering floral arrangements, the intricate chandeliers glistening like fallen stars, and the aisle covered in delicate rose petals. The scent of jasmine and peonies filled the air, a scent she usually associated with success. But tonight, it smelled like betrayal. Because the man waiting at the altar wasn't just any groom. He was Gawin. And the bride, her best friend, Ivy. Beryl's fingers curled around the clipboard in her hands, the edges digging into her palms. How had it come to this? How had fate twisted the knife so cruelly, placing her in the impossible position of planning the wedding of the only man she had ever loved? It had started months ago when Ivy had called her with uncontainable excitement. "Beryl, you have to be my wedding planner. There's no one else I'd trust." Beryl had laughed, nodding despite the exhaustion of her latest project. "Of course. Who's the lucky guy?" She hadn't been prepared for Ivy's answer, and she certainly hadn't been prepared for the storm that followed. The moment she had locked eyes with Gawin after all these years, time had ceased to exist. He was still the same, tall, sharp-featured, exuding a quiet dominance that made the air around him feel heavier. But there was something new in his gaze. A darkness. A restraint. For years she had convinced herself that whatever they had shared at university had been fleeting. A mistake, perhaps, but the way he looked at her now, with unreadable intensity, told her otherwise. Ivy had wrapped her arms around Gawin's, her smile bright and oblivious. "Can you believe it? We met completely by accident and everything just clicked. He's the one, Beryl." Beryl had forced herself to smile. "That's wonderful." But Gawin's gaze had lingered on her a second too long, his jaw tightening as if he had something to say, something Ivy couldn't hear. As the weeks passed, Beryl buried herself in work, determined to make Ivy's wedding perfect. She ignored the tightening in her chest whenever Gawin was near, ignored the way her pulse betrayed her when their hands brushed over table arrangements and fabric swatches. But the cracks in the picture-perfect engagement began to show. Ivy, always radiant and confident, started missing meetings. She cancelled fittings, rescheduled cake tastings, and drowned herself in work excuses. "Ivy, are you sure everything's okay?" Beryl had asked one evening, concern lacing her voice. "You've been so distracted." Ivy waved her off. "Just wedding stress. You know how it is." But it wasn't just wedding stress, and Beryl knew it. Then there was Gawin. At first, he had been distant, guarded. But then he started showing up when Ivy didn't. He lingered too long after meetings, his eyes tracing her every move. One night, after Ivy had once again cancelled dinner plans, Beryl found herself alone in the ballroom, inspecting the final touches. She hadn't expected Gawin to walk in. "You shouldn't be here," she said without turning. His voice was quiet. "Neither should you." She finally looked at him. "I'm the wedding planner. What's your excuse?" He exhaled sharply. "Ivy isn't coming tonight, is she?" Beryl crossed her arms. "No." There was a heavy silence before he took a step closer. "Do you ever wonder why?" Beryl stiffened. "It's none of my business." His eyes darkened. "But it is, Beryl. You know it is." She shook her head, stepping back. "You're marrying Ivy. Whatever happened between us wasn't over." His voice was a whisper, yet it carried the weight of years of unsaid words. Her breath hitched. "It has to be." Just when Beryl thought things couldn't spiral further, Ivy dropped a bombshell. "I'm leaving for Singapore," she announced suddenly one afternoon. Beryl blinked. "What?" "It's just for a week," Ivy explained, sipping her coffee nonchalantly. "Work stuff," Beryl frowned. "But the wedding is in a week." Ivy waved a hand dismissively. "I'll be back in time. You can handle everything, right?" Beryl wanted to protest, but something in Ivy's tone, an odd detachment, made her pause. Then Ivy sighed, looking at her friend with rare vulnerability. Beryl, do you think I'm making a mistake? Beryl's heart pounded. Why would you say that? Ivy stared into her coffee. Because I feel like I don't know him. The night before the wedding, Ivy still hadn't returned. Guests had arrived. The press was buzzing, but the bride was missing. Beryl found Gawin in the groom's suite, standing by the window, whiskey in hand. She's not coming back, is she? He murmured. Beryl swallowed. She might still... She won't, he said simply, turning to face her. And you know it. A lump formed in her throat. She's your fiancé, Gawin. His eyes locked onto hers, something raw and desperate flickering in them. No, Beryl, she's my escape. But you've always been the one. Beryl took a shaky step back. Don't do this, he set down his glass. Tell me you don't feel it. She opened her mouth, but no words came, because she did feel it. She had always felt it. But it was too late, wasn't it? The next morning, Ivy was gone. The venue was in chaos. Reporters swarmed, the whispers grew. Gawin stood at the altar, unshaken. And when Beryl walked toward him, she realized something terrifying. This wasn't a tragedy. It was fate. And she was done running from it. Months later, Beryl stood in a wedding venue once more. But this time, she wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding a bouquet. As she walked down the aisle toward Gawin, she finally understood. Love didn't follow rules, didn't fit into carefully planned schedules. Sometimes love was chaos, and sometimes it was worth every risk.